All right, welcome everybody again. So today we're going to talk about the power of zeal and the spiritual maturation through zeal, which is interesting. So how many of you would say that your enthusiasm has waned a little bit as you've gotten older? Yeah.
Quite the opposite.
So how many of you would say the opposite, that your enthusiasm has grown as you've gotten older? Yeah. And have you noticed that there is definitely an ebb and flow to your lack of, or your enthusiasm, you know, the amount of enthusiasm you have? Today I woke up and there was no enthusiasm in me whatsoever. I was like, really? I have to wake up again in pain? Yeah. So I'm going to highlight the evolution of the power of zeal, so you'll be able to see why that ebb and flow exists. So I had so much enthusiasm when I was growing up, and this, if you guys remember, the last time I talked about zeal, I played this video, but this was me when I was young.
Those ladies got a man who's bouncy, flouncy, and trouncy. You know who he is, so let's go meet him.
Oh, glad to meet you. Name's Tigger. T-I-G-G-R. That spells Tigger. The wonderful thing about Tiggers is Tigger's a wonderful thing. The tops are made out of rubber. The bottoms are made out of spring. They're bouncy, trouncy, flouncy, pouncy, fun, 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 fun. But the most wonderful things about Tiggers is I'm the only one. The wonderful thing about Tiggers is Tiggers are wonderful chaps. They're loaded with vim and with vinger. They love to leap in your lap. They're jumpy, bumpy, clumpy, thumpy, fun, 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 fun. But the most wonderful things about Tiggers is I'm the only one. Tiggers are cuddly fellas. Tiggers are awfully sweet. Everyone else is jealous, and that's why I repeat. Oh, the wonderful thing about Tiggers is Tiggers are wonderful things. The tops are made out of rubber. The bottoms are made out of spring. They're bouncy, trouncy, flouncy, pouncy, fun, 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 fun. But the most wonderful things about Tiggers is I'm the only one. Cheerio! Tiggers are cuddly fellas. Tiggers are awfully sweet. Everyone else is jealous, and that's why I repeat. Oh, the wonderful things about Tiggers is Tiggers are wonderful things. The tops are made out of rubber. The bottoms are made out of spring. The bouncy, trouncy, flouncy, pouncy, fun, 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 fun. But the most wonderful things about Tiggers is I'm the only one. I'm the only one.
And I wonder why my dad had a problem with me all the time, you know. It's like, just sit down and be quiet. Anyway, yeah, so that was me. Hyper excited and about everything all the time, except for, of course, my schoolwork. So my default was excitement and curiosity and constantly going and wanting to be involved in everything. And that was the problem with schoolwork, is I didn't want to sit down. I wanted to know what everybody else was doing. You know, I was very social, very little social butterfly. So anyway, So now I can embrace it a little bit better because I'm a little more grounded in the principles and grounded in who I am, and I've done a lot of inner work, and which we'll talk about. So I've been going through some keepsakes lately, and I came across letters that I had written to my mom and dad when I was in college, which was a Christian college, right? And man, I was on fire for the Lord. I was like totally preaching to my parents, my dad was an elder in our church, you know. Repent, be saved, make sure you talk to so-and-so, they really need Jesus. I was like, wow, I was really zealous. And at 10, I don't know if I've shared this with you guys, but at 10 years old, I told my minister, my preacher at the time, that I wanted to be a minister, that I wanted to be a preacher. So he's, sweetly smiled, and he said, well, you'll have to change churches. And I'm like, I didn't think about it. And it's like, oh yeah, women are not allowed to speak in our church. They were not allowed to speak. We couldn't speak in public. We couldn't pray. We couldn't out loud. We could only be teachers, like Sunday school teachers. Or if I was teaching ladies' Bible class or something, you could teach. But if you were in the middle of a prayer and a man walked into your ladies' Bible class, you had to stop praying. Because you couldn't pray in front of a man. Yeah, you could. It was really limited. So anyway, so here I am in a different congregation, a whole different thing, which is great. So anyway, so as you know, the teaching of the 12 powers of man came to Charles Fillmore, the co-founder of Unity movement, through a blend of spiritual study, mystical experiences, and biblical metaphysical interpretation. So Fillmore began to notice that Jesus' 12 apostles were each represented kind of a particular faculty or divine potential in humankind. So he interpreted the apostles not as external historical figures, but actually as symbols of inner powers. So he's attached all of it, so they were qualities of the Christ consciousness that we can all awaken. So as a mystic, Fillmore spent a lot of time, long periods of time in silent meditation and affirmative prayer, seeking direct communion with the divine mind. So through those meditative insights, he discerned that each human being expresses the same 12 fundamental aspects of divine nature that Jesus embodied perfectly. He received the names and locations of these powers through what he described as spiritual illumination rather than intellectual study. And I remember reading one time that he, Myrtle, was the one that came to him, and she was the first one that was healed or understood that there could be healing through prayer. So, and when she healed her tuberculosis, he was a businessman. He was not as much of a spiritual man, but he was a businessman, and he thought, there's something to this. So what he did is he went into the silence instead, and then he was able to reinterpret Jesus' scriptures and the scriptures around Jesus in a metaphysical way, and that's when he got the 12 powers. So his work, he emphasized that the Christ within each person seeks to express through these qualities or through these abilities. When they're harmonized, they lead to spiritual mastery, the realization of the Christ consciousness. So that's where they came from. And at 94 years old, Charles wrote the following: I fairly sizzle with zeal and enthusiasm and spring forth with a mighty faith to do the things that ought to be done by me. At 94. So I came across this when I can't remember where I found this. I think it was on Truth. There's a website called Truth Unity I think I've shared with you guys, and it's all the archives. You get all the archives of the teachings and pictures and things like that. It's really fun. But then BJ is at Unity Village. She sends me a shot of that. She sent me a shot of that on Friday or Saturday that she had found in the archives that they had posted there. So that was funny. But I'm like, I'm using that Sunday. So, but this is the quote that inspired my talk. I realized that if Charles and all the mystics of his time had an unconscious zeal, they would have burned out. They would have burned out quick, right? But they didn't. And here he is at 94 talking about sizzling, with zeal. So Simon was the apostle that Charles attributed to the power of zeal, because he was known as Simon the Zealot. So in the New Testament, so the title Zealot distinguished him from Simon Peter, which was the more well-known, the most well-known. He was the one that Jesus said, I will build my church on you. You are the rock or whatever. But we can see why Simon might have been called the Zealot, because in first century Judea, the Zealots were a Jewish movement passionate about freeing Israel from the Roman rule. They were known for their fervent patriotism and intense devotion to God's laws. So Simon might have originally been associated with, or at least sympathetic to, that movement. He would have been someone with strong conviction, ready to act boldly for what he believed was right. So when Jesus called Simon to be his disciple, he didn't distinguish that fire. He redirected it, as he does with us. And I remember thinking, if I could figure out how to redirect all this energy into something good, I might stay out of trouble. But I don't know, it didn't work. Anyway, yeah. So Simon's zeal, once perhaps political or even militant, was transformed into a spiritual passion for the kingdom of God. And another way to look at the meaning of zealot is in the metaphysical interpretation, through the unity lens. Simon the Zealot represents the spiritual faculty of enthusiasm, intensity, and the inner flame of divine energy. He stands for the quickening power of spirit that stirs us to live with purpose and vitality. And as with all the 12 powers, the power of zeal develops as our spiritual awareness develops. Under the guidance of the Christ consciousness, zeal is not reckless or impulsive. It becomes devoted enthusiasm. So I was reading, I read Ed Conrad's Daily Reader every day, his heart-centered Daily Reader, and he mentioned a woman in there by the name of Mary Wessel. And he mentioned that she started all the churches in Montana, and that she was single-handedly responsible for starting all the Unity churches in Montana. And so I looked her up, went to Truth Unity, and I looked her up. So I found her whole story. But just quickly, because I'm thinking, what a better example of what I'm talking about. This enthusiasm and zeal that can last. It's not a quick burnout. So she was born in 1982, and just a normal, I'm sorry, 1882. Thank you. 1882. It's like, wait, what? 1882. She began a teaching career in Los Angeles. But in 1906, her and her aunt were returning from Los Angeles and decided to stop at the Yellowstone, where she met her husband at Yellowstone. So they moved to Montana, where he was employed by the Forest Service and eventually located in Bozeman. So she started with the Unitarian Church. So she was very instrumental in the Unitarian movement. But her interest in the Unity School of Christianity began in 1922. Following 10 years of study, she became ordained in 1932. Okay? So at that time, she was left to raise 5 children by herself. Her husband died. So she began a 30-year ministry organizing study groups in Bozeman, Billings, Livingston, Butte, Great Falls, and Missoula. And like the Fillmores, it was not her intention to create churches that drew people away from their congregations. As with the movement nationally when it first started, that actually happened in Montana, with Billings becoming the largest and most active church. So she traveled to her people in all these places each week and made monthly calls to the ones that she didn't make it to. And she also made occasional visits in Glendive. Now get this, she did not receive 1 penny from the churches, from the group. They were called study groups at the time. No one paid her, but they would give her things. So she would accept free will offering, whatever they wanted to give her. So she was in the train so much going around the state that they gave her a lifetime pass because she didn't have any other way to travel. So when necessary, she would drive. And on very special occasions, she was bold enough to fly in a DC-3 as far as Great Falls. So so she died in 1989 at the advanced age of 101. Can you believe that? And so with the exception of the Livingston Church, her churches remain firmly rooted and number more than 1,000 members throughout the state. So I thought, wow, what example of zeal, and a kind of zeal, a conscious zeal, where she was just working steadily, but she had to wake up every day excited about something and enthusiastic about spreading it, right? So, if we back up and look at Simon, we look at Simon's transformation. When we look at that, it can represent our own. So I thought here are 3 possible levels of transformation when we look at zeal. So we go from the outer struggle, to the inner service. Then we go from human fervor to divine fervency. I love that word. Then we go from reaction to joyful action through love. Okay? So I'm going to back up, and we're going to start with the outer struggle to the inner service. What I have found to be true is that we are always being called to greater growth and greater service. Abraham Hicks says, we are growth-seeking beings. We are growth-seeking beings. That's how we are created, right? We can't not grow. No matter how long it takes, sometimes lifetimes, but we will grow. Let's start with the transformation from outer struggle to inner service. For me, the outer struggles were trauma, chronic physical pain from an early age, heartache, financial struggles, repression of my authentic, joyful self, adulting with ADHD, or trying to adult with ADHD, and addiction. And then Spirit guided me into inner service through shadow work, sobriety, unity principles, spiritual understanding, and freedom of being afraid of being my authentic self. Prosperity understandings, which came from a lot from Catherine Ponder, an early unity teacher. Acceptance of self and personal power. But it isn't until we do the inner work that we can be fully equipped for God's work. God's work is living fully in the divine expression of who we are and what we are. Nothing more, nothing less. When we heal the effects of our outer struggles and attend to our inner service, we're open and available to continue the growth of our power of zeal. So we have to be able to be open to that. So an important note here, these levels of transformation are not permanent states, but they're moments along our path. So we're going to be in our outer struggle while we're still, while we can also, the next day, be in our human fervency or in our radiant, joyful action and not reaction. I can be in reaction. You put me behind a wheel and I'm in instant reaction, I am one of the worst, not one of the worst, but it's gotten better, but I used to be really bad at road rage. Anyway, not as bad as my daughter-in-law. Wow. When I was driving with her this week in Florida, I'm thinking, dang girl, get off the horn. She was talking at everybody and yelling at them. Anyway, but sometimes it's important, I think, to know this, because sometimes on the spiritual path we think we're not far enough along. Or why can't I wake up every day and be full of zeal and love and all? Why can't all the 12 powers be, exhibited all the time? And that's not going to happen. We're human. We're human as well as spiritual. So sometimes, like I said, okay, when I became miserable enough, mired down in my outer struggles, I had no choice but to do the inner work and go to the inner service. So for me, inner service was inner work. By doing the inner work, I was able to be less ego-driven in my zeal and enthusiasm. So my journey from human fervor to divine fervency has been a slow sizzle, so to speak. For me, it was learning to trust the divine within. That was the biggest shift for me. Human fervor is the natural passion and intensity that arises from personality or the ego's fire. It's what makes us fight for what we believe in, work hard for a cause, or pour ourselves into something we love. Human fervor burns hot and fast. It's fueled by emotion, like desire, fear, anger, pride, or even excitement. And while it can accomplish a lot, it can also consume or divide if not guided by wisdom or love. I knew this kind of fire very well. I was fiercely loyal to what I thought was right, and with my righteous anger, I wanted to set things right. So I'll give you an example. This is really embarrassing, but not like everything else I've told you about myself. It shouldn't be embarrassing. But so I used to work at Rocky Mountain Home Health, right? And Rocky Mountain Health Plans. And I was in the home health division, where all our home health division was in it's kind of a separate building from the big main building across the parking lot. And it was a crappy building. It was, we called ourselves the redheaded stepchild because the paint was peeling and the carpet was crappy and we didn't have all the supplies. But I'll tell you what, those people that worked in home health worked so freaking hard. I mean, those nurses, the nurses and CNAs and the therapists were out all day long, and they had to go from home to home working with our patients. And the nurses in the office worked just as hard because they were constantly, all day long, on the phone between doctors and clinics and hospitals and insurance companies, all in the insurance company, all that. They worked so hard. So I went into the break room one day and I went to heat up something in the microwave, and the microwave didn't work. And so there was a bunch of nurses sitting there having their lunch, and I said, "What's with the microwave?" And they said, "Well, it doesn't work." And I said, "Well, has anybody put in a work order?" They said, "Yeah, they came, facilities team came and looked at it, they turned it on, said it worked, and then they left. But then it quit working again." And something clicked, which was not a good sign. And I thought, these girls work so hard in this office, and they are so stressed all day long. They need a freaking microwave that works. So I politely, not very politely, I unplugged it, grabbed it, which it was huge. I grabbed it, went around around the office, outside, and almost dropped it on the sidewalk. And I just left it. And I walked back in, and the receptionist was like, her eyes were this big. She's just like, "Do you want me to put a free sign on it?" And I'm like, "Yes, put a free sign on it." And I walked back in. I was so angry. But needless to say, I did get into a lot of trouble, and I was really lucky not to be fired. They were so mad at me. But you know what? We got a new microwave. I got those nurses a new microwave. That was righteous indignation, and righteous indignation is not really healthy. It's not healthy for anybody. Anyway, but that's what human fervor looks like. So at this point in our spiritual evolution, our service can be ego-driven. But as we develop in our spiritual awareness, continue to do our personal healing, our ego begins to soften, and the human fervor begins to develop into divine fervency. So divine fervency, by contrast, is the same energy, but it's purified and aligned with spirit. It's not about control or victory. It's about devotion and love in action. This flame doesn't burn against something. It burns for something, for life, for truth, for the good of all. I was being resistant. I was resisting the machine, resisting the establishment. Its enthusiasm is guided by wisdom and anchored in peace. It's steady, luminous, and enduring. It's not impulsive, but joyful and radiant. Divine fervency says, "Thy will be done through me." It says, "Let my passion serve love. Let my energy be a blessing to the whole." It feels like a buzz, a hum. There's a softness to it. Beneath it is a restful knowing that divine order is always at play. The passage from human fervor to divine fervency happens in the heart. It's where and when we find our joyful sizzle. So one day I was sitting thinking about random thoughts about joyful sizzle, and all of a sudden these things came to mind. Just random things that I related to as a joyful sizzle, like bacon, cooking in a pan, right? That's a joyful sizzle. The low hum of a Harley engine, not the roar, but the hum. Coffee percolating, which doesn't really happen much unless you're camping, but I love that sound. The buzz of a bee when it's collecting pollen, which is different than the buzz of a bee when it's flying. And I only know that because sitting at Orvis one day in the pool, I was eye level, and it was in the spring and all the dandelions were out, and I was sitting there watching the bees collect all the pollen, and it was this really cool sound. And they were like covered, their little legs were just like covered in pollen. But it was just this really, it was just really joyful, but I was probably stoned because of the lithium. Anyway, a child's giggle, the purr of a kitten, a drizzle of rain, the slow picking of a guitar, not a strumming, but just a slow picking of a guitar, the steady roar of the engine on a night flight when the cabin is quiet and the lights are out, monks chanting. So as the years went by and I was able to spend time with new thought teachings and healing practices that I applied to the inner service and the inner work, I was able to get out of myself, so to speak, and begin to be of service with guidance, not from ego, but from the divine within. And that's not about losing fire. It's about refining it, putting ego aside and trusting divine order. So the last level, or the last transformation that Zeal takes, is from reaction to joyful action through love. We all know what reaction is, right? It's quick, it's automatic, and often driven by emotion, fear, pride, hurt, or resistance. It happens when something outside of us triggers something inside that's not healed. Reaction is how the personality defends itself. It's not wrong, it's just simply unconscious energy responding to pressure. When our consciousness is centered in love, not fear or pride, our energy changes. Instead of being pulled into reaction, we're pulled by the still small voice within. We're able to pause, breathe, and listen. And from that inner space, what flows out is not defensive or impulsive, it's illuminated. That's joyful action. Action born of spiritual awareness. It's light-filled, purposeful, and healing to everyone it touches. Joyful action is when zeal is guided by love. So how
Can I
can...
ask a question?
Uh-huh.
Was that microwave reaction turned into joyful action when
When what was?
the microwave that you put outside, that was one reaction, but then did it turn into, because of the result of doing it, and say, yeah, put it free?
Yeah, but think about how much better it would have been for everybody had I done it a little different. I could have maybe still gotten a microwave, but it would have been, it would have been a little bit less violent.
Take the old one over to their main office and then take theirs.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I probably should have done, is just exchange it overnight, right? That's true. That's true. Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. That's an interesting, yeah. But how can you see these levels of state or states of transformation in your life right now? Where do you see yourself most when you're observing life? Are we still in the outer struggle? Are we working on our inner service? Are you sick and tired enough of being sick and tired? How's your inner service? Have you spent time loving your parts that need healing? Have you checked your ego lately? Are you reacting out of righteous indignation or emotion? And what's been working for you? Have you noticed you're calmer when receiving negative or bad news? Are you experiencing a softening in your mind, in your body? I'm a little more aware when I begin to go into that road rage. At least now I can notice it and decide, nope, I can decide. Whereas before I couldn't decide. I just went there, And so for me, it's just it's giving me more space. It's just opening a space that I'm able to be in and not just be instantly reactive, The divine power of zeal is a powerful attribute that can help us spread love instead of fear. It allows us to share joyful action, guided by love that can assist in healing the world and bring forth the positive healing energies this planet is calling for at this time. Simon the Zealot reminds us that our passions are holy, raw material. And when touched by the Christ within, our zeal becomes sacred energy, the joyful sizzle of spirit that fuels right action, creativity, and joy. So let's do a meditation. And I want to share where this came from. BJ sent me this on Friday, actually. It was right when she got to the, I think it was Thursday, actually, she got there. And this is on that, it must be the whole 12 powers, because it's the walk underneath the tower. And she sent me that, and I thought, all right, I'm going to use that. Anyway, so that's our meditation slide.
Others are.
Yeah, nearby.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I thought that was pretty cool. Anyway, so let's do a quick meditation when we think about the evolution of our zeal.